number M103 from the 1939 Mechanised Army Constructor set. Hi folks and welcome back. It's the second of the Space 2501 builds, the Federation Defender. And in many ways, I think this is the set's weakest point. On the whole, you only get to build one at a time, so for playability value, you almost need two sets. At the time of writing this, I have just finished the fourth build, the Cosmic Pirate, and I've come to a decision about how I need to view this set. To date, all I can see is its shortcomings, of which I think there was a lot. But I also need to view the good points, because there are some. When the set was being produced, we were seemingly on the verge of expanding into space. The edge of the next frontier really did seem to be within our grasp. Well, maybe to the general public anyway. Okay, maybe to the younger section of the public. I think the 1987 TV series Star Cops, set in 2027, now only 4 years away, sums up that feeling perfectly. It wouldn't be all high science fiction, but quite common, rather none too different from what we have today science fiction. But to be honest, this was a time of little money being spare in the household budget. And maybe that shows in this set. It is almost an unloved set, with seemingly the least amount of work put into it. And maybe some of the history of Meccano needs to be talked about here. Seeming as lost histories is what this channel explores. Meccano came out of the Second World War as a deeply damaged company. The compulsory war work of the conflict had not been good for the company. After all, they were a toy company. The Korean War also affected the company in 1950, as metal shortages affected not only the price, but which companies had the buying power to purchase stock. Plastic was still not available in the quality needed for parts. And Meccano's brief pre-Second World War foray into fibreboard parts had proven unsuccessful. In the early 1960s, Meccano, on the verge of bankruptcy, was purchased by Lines Brothers Limited, trading under the name of Triang. Little changed apart from the sets getting smaller with fewer parts. But this was a time of revolution in the toy industry, and an invasion was happening to the beleaguered and war-damaged British toy company. Cheap American and Far Eastern injection moulded plastic toys were beginning to flood the market. And they had the backing of much larger companies, with a greater reserve of cash to play with. By 1971, Triang, now merged with Hornby, went under, and Meccano was brought out by Airfix, making it at the time the largest British toy company. The expansion of Airfix came at a cost though, and by 1978, even with modernisation of Meccano, the Binns Road factory was shut. And this set, produced in 1979, was never made on British soil. And to hammer the hard truth home, the contact details at the front of the manual gives you a location of Granville Street, Liverpool, not Binns Road. This set was produced in France, albeit for the British market. The final point that needs to be made here is to understand what had driven this to happen. That was simply inflation. The strength of the pound against the dollar was simply the strongest driving factor, and in the early 1980s that came to a head as the pound went from $1.56 to $2.35 in a matter of months. And while this was great in many ways for companies wanting to purchase imports at a cheaper price, such as the computer industry, It destroyed the British export market, as overnight prices doubled as the world descended into the global recession of 1982. The model falls well into what was being produced for the domestic TV market at the time, with TV shows like Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, and BBC's Blake's 7, created and written by Terry Nation. Growing up, Battlestar Galactica was by far my most favourite. The idea of a bunch of plucky survivors of a collapsing civilization fighting on against an overwhelming enemy just got me. And I loved the theme music. It was aired on a Saturday morning on ITV, one of the 3 TV channels we had at the time. And my morning was spent glued to the box, watching cartoons like Battle of the Planets. In some ways, this model fits well into that theme, and its playability is linked to models produced by both Airfix and Britain's Detail range. At the time, science fiction fell into 2 types: comedy or serious science fiction based in a future setting, frequently with a moral story behind it. What the TV and film industry relied on heavily was the use of models. This was seen none more so than in the Star Wars films. The model of the X-Wing was designed by Colin Cantwell, and to me, I feel that he caught the look of the X-Wing perfectly. The job of building the models fell to Industrial Light and Magic, more commonly known as ILM. When during production ILM had fallen behind on generating the footage of the X-Wings in action, George Lucas temporarily used Second World War dogfight footage in the first edits of the movie. But the Incom T-65B X-Wing was to stand tall on the shoulders of its predecessors, taking its heritage from the Z-95 Headhunter and the ARC-170 Aggressive Reconnaissance Starfighter. The forerunners of the X-Wing couldn't be further afield, with the Z-95 being a stub-nosed starfighter used for planetary defence, but with little to no deflector shields being installed. And while adequate for its design and cost, the twin laser cannons provided limited offensive abilities. That said, it was used heavily during the latter years of the Old Republic by clone troopers, as the conflict, known as the Clone Wars, marked the ending of freedom and democracy and the birth of the Galactic Empire. The outclassed Z-95s still serve and see action, either in the hands of crime bosses or systems on the edge of the rim, where the strangling grip of the Empire is not as tight yet. On the other hand, the ARC-170 is a veritable gunboat with a crew of 3, as well as an astromech droid to facilitate both in repairs and calculating jump trajectory through hyperspace. The ARC-170 carries enough supplies up to 5 days operation in space, either to act as an ELENT electronic intelligence, whether the craft can just sit silently on the edge of a hyperspace corridor and listen to what craft are travelling, or on the edge of a system and gather intelligence on what is happening. Added to that are a formidable array of sensor jammers and scanners, or to act as a strike vessel to carry out raids on enemy bases. Powered with a powerful hyperspace drive and an over-engineered deflector shield array of a category powerful enough to allow atmospheric hyperspace jump abilities, this, paired with powerful laser cannons and targeting computers, meant that the ARC-170 could take on capital ships and win. The final addition to the arsenal is the fitting of up to 6 proton torpedoes, giving the craft a tactical strike ability that other ships lacked. In battle, to compensate the immense heat generated by the onboard generators, the fitting of strike foils, commonly known as S-foils, to each wing helped coolant to be circulated through radiators. The design of the snub-nosed fighter, added to the impressive hitting power of the Arc 170, were to be the starting base point of the T-65. Incom began production of the model as it courted the Empire for sales, only to be bested by Senna Fleet Systems with the introduction of the cheaper TIE fighter. From the get-go, a high importance was placed on pilot survivability, something that was never envisaged with the TIE fighter, leading pilots to wear a spacesuit in case of the risk of the craft suffering a catastrophic structural failure. The design of the S-foils was also incorporated into the T-65. This allowed for a weapon package with a greater range and better handling in atmospheric flight. With the addition of twin photon torpedo launchers, each carrying 3 torpedoes, the X-Wing looked like a sure-fire winner for the Imperial Navy. However, as news came to surface that Senna Fleet Systems had outmaneuvered Incom, the airframes that had already been built found a new home. Approached by the newly formed Rebel Alliance, Incom eagerly agreed to the sale, and also supplying the plans to allow Rebel shipyards to build more airframes. In probably one of the greatest intelligence failures of the war, the Imperial Security Bureau, having long had an idea the company harboured rebel sympathies, pounced too late to stop the transfer of the starfighters and the plans. Incom was to be taken over by the Empire, and it wouldn't be until the fall of the Empire, after the defeat in the Endor system, that Incom would emerge again. But the X-Wing was perfect for the rebels' doctrine of space denial, with the ability to emerge from hyperspace and attack Imperial boneyards to scavenge for parts, and to act as a blocking force while rebel crews escaped back to the relative safety of hyperspace, or interdict Imperial supply routes in a hit-and-run method of fighting which would tie down vast amounts of Imperial naval assets to hunt for and engage a much smaller but nonetheless powerful enemy, is undoubtedly one of the factors that led to the eventual collapse of the Empire. But in a toe-to-toe fight, the TIE fighter would always be quicker and more manoeuvrable. But the T-65 X-Wing had a harder hitting punch, better defences and electronic countermeasures, and will always be, in my mind, a craft that sums up what the last note of freedom sounds like.